series. I'm Lewis Krause from the Pacific ADA Center, your moderator for this series. This series of webinars is brought to you by the Pacific ADA Center on behalf of the ADA National Network. The ADA National Network is made up of 10 regional centers that are federally funded to provide training, technical assistance, and other information as needed on the Americans with Disabilities Act. You can reach your regional ADA center by dialing 1-800-949-4232. Real-time captioning is provided for this webinar. The caption screen can be accessed by choosing the CC icon in the meeting control toolbar. To toggle that meeting control toolbar on, you can press your Alt key. As always in our sessions, only the speakers will have audio. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer or prefer to listen by phone, you can dial 1-669-900-9128 or 1-646-558-8656 and use the webinar ID of 872-0730-7836 and the passcode of 742075. A reminder to everyone that this webinar is being recorded and you'll be able to access that on adapresentations.org in the archives section of emergency management next week. This is the 7th year of this webinar series, which shares issues and promising practices in emergency management, inclusive of people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs. The series topics cover emergency preparedness and disaster response, recovery and mitigation, as well as accessibility and reasonable accommodation issues under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the ADA, and other relevant laws. Upcoming sessions are available at adapresentations.org under the Schedule tab in the Emergency Management section. These monthly webinars occur on the second Thursday of the month at 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central, 12:30 Mountain, and 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. By being here, you are on the list to receive notices for future webinars in this series, and those notices go out 2 weeks before the next webinar and open that webinar to registration. You can follow along on the webinar platform with the slides. If you are not using the webinar platform, you can download a copy of today's PowerPoint presentations at the adapresentations.org webpage in the schedule section. At the conclusion of today's presentation, there will be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions. You may submit your questions using the chat area within the webinar platform, and the speaker and I will address them at the end of the session. So feel free to submit them as they come to your mind during the presentation. To submit your questions, you open the chat area text box, or you can press Alt-H and enter your text in the chat area. If you are listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you may ask your questions by emailing them to adatech@adapacific.org. That's adatech@adapacific.org. Also, if you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can send a private chat message to the host by typing in your chat window, or you can email us again at adatech@adapacific.org. Or finally, you can call us at 510-285-5600. Today's ADA National Network Learning Session is titled Global Disability Leadership Before, During, and After Disasters. Disability leaders are very active in global disability inclusive disaster and climate initiatives. We're going to learn today about what's happening in emergency preparedness, disaster risk reduction, sustainable development goals, climate justice, humanitarian action, community resilience, Article 11 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, disability inclusion strategy, building back better, and other global disaster and disability initiatives. And here an update on what people are working on. And today's speaker is going to lead us through that. It's Marcy Roth. Marcy is the Executive Director of the World Institute on Disability and a global leader on disaster and disability. She is focused on improving outcomes for disaster impacted people with disabilities and disability-led organizations and communities for 20 years. So Marcy, after a long delay, I will turn it now over to you.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Marcy Roth, and I want to begin by thanking Lewis and the ADA National Network for this opportunity to join you all in discussing what's happening before, during, and after disasters among global disability leaders. Let me also say, much as I was hoping to be joined by my colleagues Herman Perotti, Shaylin Slozales, and Carlos Kaiser, they are unable to join us today, but I very much look forward to sharing information that they are deeply involved in. I also want to thank Lewis for holding this meeting until it was accessible. This should be standard practice, and I applaud the Pacific ADA Center for waiting until our captioner was here. First slide, please. So today I'm going to talk about a variety of initiatives that are underway globally that have quite a bit of involvement from people with disabilities. And as I don't have to tell the folks who joined us today, the frequency, intensity, and duration of disasters is truly growing. In fact, over the past 50 years, over 100 people have died every day, and there have been over $200 million in disaster-related losses. The increase has been fivefold over the 50-year period. This is in part because of the impact of climate change and what has come with climate change, which is more extreme weather. But also it's also possible that this is because of improved reporting. The good news, if there's any good news in this, is that the deaths have significantly decreased over this 50-year period. That's because of improvements in early warnings and in emergency and disaster management. Next slide, please. However, unfortunately, for people with disabilities, the news doesn't, there's no payoff in that, because as people with disabilities, we are 2 to 4 times more likely to be injured or to die in a disaster. And that's not because of our disability. That's not because of any diagnosis or condition. It's because of a failure of planning, accessibility, providing accommodations and modifications, and globally, the numbers have continued to be at least this high. And unfortunately, with COVID, the numbers are significantly higher. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take us back, and we're going to spend time today looking at what has happened over the past 21 years, which in fact, it is this week for me that my lifelong work in disability inclusion took a very focused dive into, in many ways, into what happens for people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. So I'm going to start by just reflecting on the Millennium Development Goals, which were launched in the year 2000, and they were they followed a declaration that was focusing on the reduction of extreme poverty and establishing 15-year targets for decreasing poverty and increasing outcomes. Next slide. But people with disabilities were not included in the goals. We were not mentioned in the goals, and thus people with disabilities were not involved in any of the development initiatives or any of the money that was being spent in that first 15 years in those development goals. Next slide, please. So in 2006, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was then brought into force 2 years later. And this treaty shifts policy and policy implementation from a charity and medical model approach to one that is based on rights. This is the only treaty that addresses the rights and needs of people with disabilities, who, as we all know, are the world's largest minority. And of course, anyone can join our club at any time. And as a person with a disability, I just want to enforce that this is something I am very proud of as a person with a disability. So next slide, please. The convention was in fact signed and ratified by many of the nation states, which is the UN term for countries. And I've put up a map that shows who has not signed, who has signed the convention itself and the optional protocol, who has ratified, holding themselves accountable to it, and who has ratified the convention and the optional protocol. Next slide, please. So 164 member states or countries have signed and ratified. 9 member states have not ratified. And those 9 states are Bhutan, Cameroon, Lebanon, Liechtenstein, Solomon Islands, Tajikistan, Tonga, the United States of America, and Uzbekistan. So 164 have signed, 9 have not, and the United States is one of those 9. So we could spend a lot of time today talking just about the CRPD. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, ratification will require the US Senate to agree to this ratification. And while it's hard to imagine that we have not made that kind of progress yet, many would say we are not any closer right now. So next slide, please. In the convention, there are 50 articles, 50 separate areas in which the convention, the treaty speaks to the rights of persons with disabilities. And because our topic today is really focused on disability and disaster, I'm only going to call out Article 11, which speaks to situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies. And so, for example, those member states who have signed and ratified agree to take, in accordance with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law, all necessary measures to ensure the protection and safety of persons with disabilities in situations of risk, including situations of armed conflict, humanitarian emergencies, and the occurrence of natural disasters. So many of the 50 articles also play a very significant and important role for people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. But Article 11 is the article in which a significant amount of focus has recently turned as some new tools and resources begin to come online. I'm going to move on now, and if we could go to the next slide. We're going to leave the CRPD for a moment, and we're going to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, many people are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, and yet I think here in the US, there really hasn't been a whole lot of focus on what this is. So the Sustainable Development Goals followed the Millennium Development Goals. They were established in 2015 by the UN, and just as those first 15 years, there were priorities for eliminating poverty. The Sustainable Development Goals include 17 interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. The expectation is that all of the goals would be achieved by the year 2030. Next slide, please. And the then UN Undersecretary stated, "It was the first time in human history that we as human beings reached consensus on the future of development." And we could be the first generation to succeed in ending poverty everywhere. Next slide, please. And what's significant about the Sustainable Development Goals and the declaration was that it really focused on very nicely on a shared universal ambition to eliminate poverty, while at the same time giving nations the individual expectations and the ability for them to utilize their capacities and policies and where they're at in development. Next slide, please. One of the big challenges with the Sustainable Development Goals is that while happily the SDGs include people with disabilities for the very first time, oftentimes people are referred to as the vulnerable or vulnerable populations. The good news is that the agenda, in referring to vulnerable populations, it actually means people with disabilities as well as many others, women, children, and yet the folks who were working on the passage of the next 15-year agenda, there was a decision not to, in that 2030 agenda, it was decided not to press the use of vulnerable, which there are many people who, I would be one of them, who struggled then, and I struggle now. Next slide, please. So if you look at what happened with the first 15 years of the new millennium and those millennial goals, and then the 2030 agenda, you will see that in those first 15 years, there were no references to persons with disabilities. But fortunately, in the strategic development goals, there are 7 references: 2 in education, 1 in employment, 1 in reducing inequities, 2 in inclusive cities, 1 in disaggregation of data by disability. And as well, there are 11 in the 2030 agenda and 9 in the global indicators. Next slide, please. And very simply, when we're talking about sustainable development, there are 5 pillars. Those are people, prosperity, peace, partnership, and planet. And again, I would love to do a deep dive into all of these, but we won't have that opportunity today. But I've given you lots of links throughout the slides so that if folks are wanting to learn more, you can take that dive on your own. And the agenda speaks very specifically to sustainable development, recognizing that eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, combating inequality within and among countries, preserving the planet, creating sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, and fostering social inclusion are linked to each other and are independent. So while we don't see the specific disability language in some of the sweeping mentions, it certainly gives us quite a bit to work with. And I forgot to tell you next slide. So please go to. Thank you. And again, in the goals and targets, there are 7 explicit references, as I shared, 18 references to vulnerable populations, and all-inclusive language links to people with disabilities and includes the principle throughout of leave no one behind. Next slide, please. So if in looking at the strategic development goals and the articles of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, the articles are cross-cutting. And so of those 50 articles, I have particularly called out the general principles and the general obligations, equality and non-discrimination, women with disabilities, children with disabilities, awareness raising, accessibility, Article 11, situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies, as I mentioned earlier, equal recognition before the law, access to justice, personal mobility, freedom of expression and opinion, and access to information, statistics and data collection, international cooperation, and national implementation and monitoring. And I'll tie all of this together a little bit further in a few minutes. But let me call out how with the overarching goal of eradicating poverty, the overarching goal of sustainable development globally, giving both the overarching global commitment and each country being able to personalize and address the sustainable development goals, the human rights and disability rights elements that are included in the convention itself provide for us a huge opportunity to drive, particularly in the places where they have both signed and ratified the CRPD. Those countries are really focusing on connecting the dots and using those CRPD obligations to drive disability inclusion throughout the Sustainable Development Goals. And next slide, please. An important point about accountability was made by the chair of the International Disability Alliance when those SDGs were first agreed to. And she said, persons with disabilities were instrumental in creating this transformational roadmap to a better future. Now the hard work of real change lies directly ahead. Persons with disabilities must be leaders, guiding the world towards achieving these goals for everyone. This journey demands our persistent and unwavering duty to hold our governments accountable to their own commitments. Our full engagement in the follow-up and review mechanism is fundamental. We cannot afford to be left behind again. Next slide, please. So, later in 2015, a multi-year initiative to update what had previously been what was called the HIOGO framework for disaster risk reduction. It was time to update that framework to expand from 2015 to 2030. So following the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction was developed over the subsequent years. And happily, there was very active involvement among people with disabilities globally. I was at FEMA in those days, and in fact, I was included as part of the US delegation that went to Sendai, Japan in 2015 to agree to this very important agreement that has specific targets and priorities for action to substantially reduce disaster risk and losses of life, livelihoods, and health, and to focus on those losses of economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries. And the Sendai framework was the first of the agreements that came after the agenda, the 2015 to 2030 agenda that established the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. So the Sendai framework and the priorities, as I said, were very much developed with a very active involvement from disability leaders. Many of us met several times before 2015, before we all gathered in Sendai, Japan. And there were, I think, about 125 disability leaders in attendance in that meeting in 2015. This meeting was called a global platform for disaster risk reduction. There have been three since then. No, I'm sorry, there have been two since then. And one was in Cancun, Mexico. The other one was in Geneva. And the next one will be in May of 2022 in Bali, Indonesia. And there has been a very broad involvement from disability leaders in each of those subsequent global platforms. And as well, there are regional platforms, and the regional platform that we in the US are part of will be in October, and I'm sorry, November. I'll have the dates in a moment. And that meeting will be a virtual meeting, so everyone can attend, which is just wonderful. And the intention of these platforms are to review progress, share information, and discuss developments and trends in reducing disaster risk. These discussions then drive a high-level political forum on sustainable development that occurs each year, and also has a significant amount of involvement from disability leaders. Although, let me say, very few people from the US, and particularly very few who are focusing on disaster risk reduction are actively involved in the implementation of the targets for the Sendai framework. The 4 priorities are to understand disaster risk, strengthen disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk, invest in disaster risk reduction for resilience, and enhance disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery and rehabilitation and reconstruction. So next slide, please. Oh, next slide, please. And so there are 4 global targets that call for reduction and 3 global targets that call for an increase. So the 4 that call for reduction are reduction in mortality, reduction in affected people, reduction in economic loss, and reduction in damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. And the increases are for countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies, increases in international cooperation, and increases in the availability and access to multi-hazard early warning systems and disaster risk information. So if there are those who've joined us today who are actively involved in the US work around meeting those global targets, I would love to talk with you more about what that looks like in your local community or in your state, and as well in the work that you're doing nationally, because there are very few of us who are focusing on what's happening with the US's contributions to the Sendai framework. And over the past 4 years, the US focus was primarily on insurance, which for people with disabilities, people experiencing poverty, the focus around insurance and reducing economic loss is not something that is something that most of us are at the table around. So next slide, please. And the Sendai framework does refer to people with disabilities. It also refers to universal design. We worked really hard to get that language in there. And one of the best insertions in the framework is the framework recognizes that not only are persons with disabilities disproportionately affected by disasters, but crucially, that their knowledge and leadership skills are essential for building resilient, inclusive, and equitable societies. So, it's so important that we recognize that it's not just about monitoring and enforcing our rights, although boy, it sure is an imperative that the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act and other disability laws are in fact being implemented, monitored, enforced. This takes it farther and says it's not just that we are disproportionately impacted, but that we have the knowledge and leadership skills to benefit the whole community. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend some time talking about some ways that folks can get involved. And then I'm going to talk about as well some other aspects that I hope you'll find of interest. So first and foremost, there is a thematic group on disaster risk reduction. And this is a group of folks who are focused on contributing to the monitoring of the Sendai framework, and as well, how the Sendai framework impacts the overarching 2030 agenda. And if you are interested in joining that thematic group, I've provided a link for folks to do that. Next slide, please. As I had mentioned, the regional platform for disaster risk reduction in the Americas and the Caribbean will be held the first week in November, and that will be a virtual event. Herman Parodi has played a very significant role in the planning for the regional platform for disaster risk reduction. And I have as well been involved in both this and several other of the regional platforms. And we sure would love to have more folks actively involved. Next slide, please. I had mentioned the global platform, which is where all of the regions come together. Last time we met in Geneva, and there were, I think, no, I think I was wrong. In 2015, I think we had about 400 disability leaders. In Cancun, we had, I think, about 250. And then in Geneva, we had about 125. So at this next global platform, which will be in May of 2022, as it stands right now, it is planned to be held in Bali, which is, an incredible destination and a place where disasters are very common. It's also a country that has a very active disability leadership. So if you're wanting to follow the planning for the global platform for disaster risk reduction, I've also shared a link here. Next slide, please. So after the Sendai framework was first agreed to in 2015, there was a conference later on that year in Dhaka, and there was a declaration that was adopted that focuses on the inclusion and meaningful participation of people with disabilities in all disaster risk management programs. And that declaration was updated in 2018. I've provided the declaration, and I have not yet heard about the next conference on disability and disaster risk management, but I would anticipate, because those targets ended in 21, I would anticipate that the conference will be scheduled for sometime in either 2022 or 2023. Next slide, please. Also in 2016, there was a charter on the inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action, and that was launched at the World Humanitarian Summit, and very widely involved. And the charter, which I will share with you in the next slide, is a collective willingness to enhance the effective inclusion and participation of persons with disabilities and their representative organizations across the humanitarian system. Next slide, please. The 5 key elements of the charter are non-discrimination, participation, inclusive policy, inclusive response and services, and cooperation and coordination. Next slide, please. And following this, in 2019, there was, after quite a bit of work that began in 2016, there was the launch of the UN Interagency Standing Committee on Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities in Humanitarian Action. And the 2019 release of those guidelines have really driven a lot of activity around the inclusion of people with disabilities as both beneficiaries and as actors throughout humanitarian response. Next slide, please. And once the charter was, oops, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so so a reference group was established to continue that work and to support the development, dissemination, and implementation of the guidelines. And for folks who are interested in becoming involved in the reference group, I've placed a link for folks to join the reference group. And it's called the DRG, the Disability Reference Group, has 7 specific working groups. And I am the lead for working stream 7, which is a work group of disability-led organizations, disabled persons organizations, depending on where you are. Some people refer to disabled persons organizations, DPOs. Some folks say organizations of persons with disabilities, OPDs, and some disability-led organizations in a commitment to identity first. My organization, the World Institute on Disability, focuses primarily on using DPO, disabled persons organizations, or disability-led organizations, DLOs. So again, we have a working group. I would welcome those DPOs to join the work stream that I'm leading, and as well the other aspects of the reference group.
Yeah, I'm having some sort of hardware failure. Yeah. I'm going to have to completely restart my PC.
Okay, I can't do a thing. It won't let me do anything.
Yeah, I need to restart, reconnect.
Okay.
That'll be about 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay. So it seems like we're having some technical difficulties. And so I will just keep going, but I won't have the slides, but those slides will be available to everyone. There are a number of actions that are recommended, and the World Bank has really summarized these very well when it comes to disability inclusive disaster risk management. And those change is a next frontier in social responsibility. I'm now on slide 36, just so you know. The UN last year, 2 years ago, established a sweeping disability inclusion strategy, and all UN agencies are on a 5-year plan to implement the disability inclusion strategy. And it operates under 4 pillars: leadership, strategic planning and management, inclusiveness, programming, and organizational culture. And then there are 15 indicators, and every federal agency needs to, every UN agency needs to have a 5-year plan for meeting all of those, meeting or exceeding. I am now focused on armed conflict and humanitarian crises, and want to point out that the UN Security Council adopted a resolution on focusing on persons with disabilities and armed conflict and humanitarian crises. And the Security Council has recognized, and this resolution has identified the serious concerns about the disproportionate impact of armed conflict on persons with disabilities. They've identified, next slide, please. They've identified proposed actions. And those of us who are working on this are very hopeful that those next actions are going to be, are going to really drive significant improvement. There's a report on the rights, next slide, please. There's a report on the rights of persons with disabilities in armed conflict, and I have provided, next slide, please. I have provided a link to that. And next slide. I'm now going to take a few minutes to talk about the Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration. The Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration is also called GADRA, and GADRA was launched by the World Institute on Disability, the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, and Inclusiva. And it has been our intention over the past year since we first launched GADRA to develop and initiate an effort to direct disaster relief, humanitarian relief directly from the major corporate and foundation funders to local disability-led organizations impacted by disasters, cutting through all of the ongoing, I call it the humanitarian industrial complex, because as we've learned in the year since we launched GADRA, local disability-led organizations are almost never the direct recipients of disaster relief. This is true as recently as this past week. And our intention with the Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration is to support organizations to support the people that they serve in that local community so that they can continue their operations to meet the needs of their community. Next slide. So we have brought folks together 9 times with remote global gatherings. We've had 73 countries participating from 6 of the 7 continents. We haven't given up on Antarctica yet, but we're 6 out of 7. We have a founders circle that is made up of allies, funders, disability-led organizations, and those funders, corporations, and foundations work with us to identify and make matches directly with local disability-led organizations so that those corporations, those funders can directly support. We say that we are disrupting exclusion by accelerating radical inclusion of these disaster resources when and where and how they're needed most. Our next event, next slide, please, we're real excited about. We are partnering with Gallaudet University, and our next event, Deaf-Led Disaster Action, will bring together deaf leaders working on disaster from Vietnam, Trinidad and Tobago, and Japan. And we will be providing sign language interpretation in 3 languages and international sign. And of course, it will also be captioned. This is the first of a 3-part series. And if you would like more information, next slide, we invite you to join GADRA. We invite you to register for these upcoming events. And with that, next slide, please. I think we actually have a few minutes for Q&A. So thank you again. And I hope that those of you who have an interest in breaking down some of the silos in our US-centric disaster efforts and in learning from, working with, and joining the leadership of disability leaders who are working on disability inclusion before, during, and after disasters. So, Louis, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcy. And thank you all for your patience while we had a little bit of technical difficulties. And good job, Marcy, just keeping on plugging through while we were having crashing systems and whatnot behind the scenes. So all of you, please remember to submit your questions in the chat window now, and we'll get to those as we can here. So here's a first one for you, Marcy. The US has its own laws on accessibility for persons with disabilities and/or access and functional needs. Do you feel the UN requirements are better or have aspects that you feel could be added to the US laws that could improve things in our country?
So thank you, Louis. So first of all, it's not a matter of better or worse. It's a matter of collaboration. There are some things that we do quite well, but there's a whole lot that other countries are doing far better. And it's not just about the laws. You know, we have, as we all know, the Americans with Disabilities Act is 31 years old. The Rehabilitation Act is almost 50 years old. And as recently as this past week, we have seen the unbelievable failures of our systems to support people with disabilities and to engage local community leaders in managing the horrific circumstances as well. The past year and a half in both COVID and in concurrent disasters. There's a lot we could be learning from the other countries. So it's not a matter of, do we have enough? Is what we have adequate? It's why wouldn't we want to join the other 162 countries who are working together? I mean, they have meetings that the US can't actively participate in because we're not voting members because we haven't ratified the convention. So I just don't think there's any benefit in not ratifying the CRPD. And I think if we are really committed to eradicating poverty, if we are really committed to sustainable development, we need to join the rest of the world in figuring out how to get this much, much more better than it's been.
All right, let me get you in the next question. In your study and analysis of the persons with disabilities dying more in disasters, has it been determined if they were not able to prepare because they could not see, hear the announcements of the emergency, or if they were in an economic demographic that they didn't have the financial means to leave in advance, or was it due to the disability the individuals had that they were not able to evacuate? Can you please break down the information in more detail? And I know that you probably aren't going to do that so much, Marcy. So let me sort of before you answer, let people know that if you ask this question or if you're interested in this, you should go back to our archive here on the emergency management system and webinar series. And there was a talk given by Laura Stowe, who has this research, and she presented that here on our webinar series about 2 years ago, I'm going to guess off the top of my head. Okay, go ahead, Marcy.
Yeah, thanks. And the answer is yes. All of these contribute, and all of them are it is possible to eliminate the reasons for whichever of these is the particular disproportionately impacting thing that resulted in the loss of life or preventable injury or institutionalization. I mean, we could have a whole other discussion about institutionalization. I haven't really spent a lot of time talking about that today. It is a huge part of the global crisis as well.
Okay, very good. I think we are going to, we realize that many of you have more questions, and we got a little bit slimmed down by the initial technical difficulties here. So apologize for if you didn't get a chance to ask your question. Marcy has kindly put her email address there on the screen if you want to contact her about these things. If your question is about the ADA, you can contact your regional ADA center at 1-800-949-4232. You will receive an email with a link to an online session evaluation. Please complete that evaluation for today's program. We really value your input and want to make sure that those of our funders understand the value of what we're producing here. And we want to thank Marcy for her sharing her time and knowledge with us. It was very interesting, really interesting look and comparison and thinking about the ADA and how things fit globally. So, and a reminder to you all that today's session was recorded. It will be available for viewing next week at adapresentations.org in the archive section of the emergency management area. And watch your email for the next webinar that we will be hosting in October. And so we appreciate, again, thank you very much, Marcy, and thank you all for coming and sitting through the couple of technical problems that we had today. So thank you for attending today's session, and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.